we're here to make a new type of news.
New insights, new styles, and new topics every day.
We are News Generation.
Making news just for you. It's July 24th here in Seoul. I'm Shin-Yoon, and this is News Generation, where we make the news at Arirang's very own open studio. Every morning, we'll discuss the top issues and latest current affairs affecting people in their 20s and 30s. Joining me in the studio is Choi Ji-hee.
Good morning, everyone.
And Cheska Dainong.
Happy Monday, everyone!
Monday! Now, both are here to speak on behalf of people in their 20s and 30s. As usual, let's start with our news feed, which covers different hashtags and news items that have been trending on social media over the past 24 hours. Last Friday, a man with a knife went on a deadly stabbing rampage near Sinlim Station in southern Seoul. He killed a man in his 20s and injured 3 other men. The suspect is a 33-year-old man who goes by the surname Cho, who was detained on Friday. And netizens are currently looking into how there was a post uploaded online in May, which seemingly suggested this man had been trying to stab people from then. Moving on, the nation is mourning the death of a 23-year-old teacher who was responsible for first graders at Seoul's Hallye Elementary School in southern Seoul. She apparently took her own life in a classroom last Tuesday morning. She had only been hired about 5 months ago, and some have been speculating online that she chose to take her own life after suffering from parents' ongoing complaints about school violence. The school has so far denied such allegations. And moving on to our last story. Over the weekend, the police have received nearly 2,000 reports of suspicious international parcels being delivered across the nation. Most of them seemingly came from Taiwan, containing lip balm or other cheap products. Some had nothing inside them. Police suspected these packages could have contained hazardous materials, especially since some recipients said they suffered dizziness and found difficulty breathing. Now we're going to take a closer look at the last story. Police will decide whether to launch an investigation only after they've received the results of their substance analysis. In the meantime, they've asked people to be aware of such parcels. The color of the packages could most likely be yellow and black and have Cheonghwa Post written on them. And the Taipei mission in South Korea has since conducted probes over the delivery route and found that they were sent initially from China. There was a stopover in Taiwan, though, which made a lot of people think that they are from Taiwan. And since last Thursday, we've seen these random parcels arrive in different parts of the country, including Ulsan, Daegu, and even Jeju Island. And hearing this story made me concerned about what to do if I got any parcel, because Cheska, I don't know about you, when I usually go out of my door and see these packages, I'm really excited to open them all up.
Me too!
But after hearing the story, I was actually quite frightened. What about you?
I felt exactly the same way. I'm sure all of us here, we use a lot of international shipping. I'm sure on a daily basis, we get on average 1 to probably 2 packages, if not more. So the fact that there are these international packages coming with possibly a biochemical hazardous material was actually very frightening. And I also got the warning message as well. And what it immediately reminded me of was those biochemical attacks that we've been just thinking about, or at least seeing in the movies.
Yeah.
So as a citizen of this country, I am truly frightened, and I do hope the investigation quickens so that we can feel really safe about these packages arriving at our
What
doors.
about you, Ji?
I mean, I felt the same way as both of you. It was ridiculous, and I was at first like, why would Taiwan be sending these random
Right.
parcels to Korea? But when I heard that they were initially from China, I kind of understood, like China, they often have these random acts going on, and I was really scared that they could be these empty parcels in particular. They could be infectious biological substances, since some recipients, they've expressed that they felt physical symptoms. I mean, more investigation will be needed to see some correlation between that, but I am really scared.
Your suspicion went up.
It did.
And if you look at the news feed for this Monday, we've had a lot of tragic things happen. I don't know about you, but that affected me emotionally as well. We've seen a stabbing rampage in Sinlim Station here in southern Seoul. We've seen teachers take their own lives or being beaten by students. And not to talk, mentioning these international parcels that seem to contain very hazardous materials. It's quite worrying. And hopefully tomorrow we'll have a brighter sense of news feed. But now let's head into our discussion topic. Just last week, a U.S. soldier crossed into North Korea. Why? We still have to find out what his exact intentions were. But to find out how this happened, take a look at the screen. Travis King was supposed to head back home to Texas. Instead, he decided to join a tour to the Joint Security Area on the inter-Korean border last Tuesday. Then, he willingly crossed over to the north. Witnesses say he cackled ha 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 on the way. King is the 7th U.S. service member to have crossed over to the north by his own choice. What's worth noting, though, is that he was due to face some penalties in the States after being detained in South Korea on assault charges. As of now, he's thought to be under DPRK custody. Experts believe that the North will most likely hand him over to the States after evaluating whether King is of intelligence worth. Apart from a diplomatic and national security perspective, many youth are curious as to how border crossings are even possible in heavily armed places like the JSA. So how did Travis King, this U.S. soldier, manage to cross the border to North Korea? To find out more about this issue, we're going to take a look at how the JSA tour works in the first place. And before we do that, we're going to ask our panelists in the studio what they thought about this uncanny story. I mean, it seems to be like a scene from a movie, don't you think?
Exactly. It's very bizarre. I was really shocked. Although this isn't the first time a U.S. soldier crossed to North Korea, I even read that King's mother was very surprised, and she wouldn't imagine her son doing anything like this.
Right.
But I often feel like parents, they're the last people to really know about their
That's so
children.
sad.
It is sad. And as we know, King was actually imprisoned with an assault previously, and he was to go back to the U.S. for more military punishment. And instead of taking the flight, he just randomly went on a JSA tour.
Yeah.
He was dressed in civilian clothes. He even changed, and then he just dashed off to North Korea. And judging by all the things that he's done in the past, it seems like it wasn't pre-planned. It was very impulsive, and who knows why it all began. You know?
Right, though his mother might say she would have never
Exactly.
imagined such a calm kid to do anything like this. By the looks of it, he does seem to be a spontaneous and
Yes.
bizarre U.S. soldier, I guess. Now, what do you think about this story?
I mean, it definitely is one of the most uncanny events that has happened this year. And we've had quite an uncanny
did.
reportings that we've done in News Gen, but this seems to be definitely on the top 5, I would say. And as Jihi mentioned, some of the testimonials from the mum, but many officials and reports say, quote, this is a very willful and intentional act.
Right.
So, and I actually asked some of my American military friends because I wanted to get their opinion. And they said, one, as a soldier, you should have been aware of the consequences of doing such an action. And two, if he did it without knowing those consequences, that too is a problem.
That is a very big problem because it's cost so much for so many people, not to mention the diplomatic effects that we'll have to think about, and he won't be solving that. That's up to the United States and North Korea to
Absolutely.
have to do. But it's not the first time that a U.S. national has crossed over to the North, has it?
And you mentioned it in the VCR as well. Apparently, despite it being so uncanny, apparently this isn't the first time. And I, too, was quite surprised. We've had about 7 soldiers that defected to North Korea since the Korean War. And actually, the common motivation for these soldiers taking these drastic measures was, to avoid court martials or discharges, facing some of the consequences in their home states.
Right.
There was a Larry Allen Abshir was the first to cross the border, and he also wanted to avoid the military court. And James Dresnock and Charles Robert Jenkins also provided some very interesting insights into what their life was like in North Korea once they returned.
I see. Now, Cheska, based on what we've seen in the past then, what do you think will happen to Travis King? Will he be returned to the United States anytime soon?
I really think that's $1 million
It
question.
is.
So I can only talk from some of the past rulings/precedents that have happened to the 7 American soldiers. And most likely, based on the past precedents, he will face dishonorable discharge, a military court ruling from the court martials, and possibly a demotion. Because as we mentioned, as a military man, you should be very clear and aware of the consequences and the responsibility that you carry. And he did it very willfully by crossing the border. And I saw some of the comments that Koreans left on the video. And because we are so well aware of what it's like to live in North Korea, they, quote, made a pun on the very famous K-drama, Crash Landing on You, to say he crash landed in hell.
Oh my goodness.
And they sent their best condolences to King's choice. So it's very clear that he might not have the best life in North Korea, and I hope he returns.
A lot of experts think that the chances of him being returned home is very feeble, actually. So that's what we're saying. He should have thought about his actions before pulling through. And see, why don't we now focus on what the JSA is all about? Can you tell us what it stands for and how heavily militarized is it? Because we're saying it's uncanny for this to have happened during a tour like this, right?
Exactly. So the JSA, or the Joint Security Area, is also known as Panmunjom or the Peace or Truce Village. And geographically, it's a section of the demilitarized zone, or the DMZ, which is 250 kilometers long, that's separating North and South Korea. And in 1948, when Korea was divided into North Korea and South Korea, the DMZ marked the border between the two countries. And then the Korean War broke out in 1950, which ended in an armistice in 1953. And that armistice was signed at the JSA. And at that point, the DMZ became a 2-kilometer wide buffer zone. And the Peace Village is made up of bright United Nations blue buildings. We're very familiar with that picture. And the two Koreas have their own liaison offices there as well. And currently, we have troops from each country facing each other as well across the military demarcation line. And the JSA is overseen by North Korea and the UN command. And famously, we know of the picture of the blue buildings because in 2018 and 2019, respectively, the leaders of North Korea and the then South Korean President Moon Jae-in, as well as in 2019, US President Donald Trump also met with Korean leader Kim Jong-un. And we know that very famous spot in JSA, which is divided by the demarcation line as well.
Right. Not only do you see it on the news, but also I think it's a quite popular attraction if you're studying here in Korea. Because back in college, I remember as part of a class agenda, me and my international friends were sent to the JSA tour. And I was really scared at first because it was my first time actually seeing North Korea. I mean, the concept of North Korea startled me at first because I know about it diplomatically and in a political sense, but to see actual North Korean soldiers stand right in front of me was very interesting yet scary at the same time.
And they keep telling you, like, that's North Korea. Like, you can see the...
They keep mentioning it, and they're like, don't make drastic movements. Don't move your hands up too quick or take, like, photos with flash.
I remember that,
And I was like, we are really a war-torn country right now. I should be keeping my, attention really hyped up and thinking of what's happening because right now I'm in the middle of North and South Korea.
Literally.
Exactly. And Cheska, could you elaborate and tell us how many international travelers or tourists might know about the JSA or the JSA tour itself?
Yeah, and actually your testimony reminded me a lot of the things because when I visited too, I remember them telling us to be very careful about, our hand gestures or what to do here and there.
Don't provoke anyone.
Exactly. I also think they were making fun of us just to scare us a little bit, but it was kind of almost intense how that geopolitical complexities, really felt in the skin as we were standing right there in front of the border. And actually, a lot of my international friends always ask, hey, have you been to the DMZ? Like, how do I get there? So it's a very popular tourist site. And, the United Nations Command actually does a tour about 4 times a week for all the international people, including the Koreans. And this is where Travis King made the leap. But JSA is a very popular site for movies as well. We literally had a movie called JSA. And also, 실미도 and Still Rain. But I do believe that this is a site where people can actually feel and tangibly experience the geopolitical complexities of our nation.
Exactly. You can literally feel that the country is torn into two. It makes you really think about our sad history, and it also makes you think about the geopolitical tensions we're living in, which is why it was so hard for me to understand how he could have leaped to North Korea in such a tense environment. And we've actually prepared an interview with a fellow millennial who's been to both the JSA tour in South Korea and in North Korea, and we're going to include him in our talks right after this. So we're going to hear from someone who's actually been a part of the JSA tour in the past. It's Bart van Genuten, who's attended this tour in both South and North Korea. And Bart is a content creator who has made a few vlogs on his trip to North Korea. We've had him on our show a few times, so great to have you back on our show, Bart.
Thanks for having me again.
Hello.
All right, Bart. So as I mentioned a few times, you've been on the JSA tour both here in South Korea and in the North, which is quite interesting. So could you share your experience on what the tours were like and how different it was for each country?
Yeah, I went on the JSA tour in South Korea back in 2014. So things were different that time. It was a bit more tense. and the same tour in North Korea in 2018. And what I remember is that you had to book the tour with your passport. There was no other way. And then you had to sign a security waiver, which basically says, if you do something stupid, then you're accountable for it yourself. So the organization is not going to be accountable for anything that you do there. And then what is the same on both sides, that you're not allowed to take photos or videos on your way into the DMZ. So like in the bus, you're not allowed to take out your camera, stuff like that. But I also remember the South Korean side being quite strict. We were not allowed to wear shorts, for example, or torn down clothes, which are considered fashionable maybe in the West, but in North Korea, that's what they said. They can use that as a propaganda tool to tell their own people, see, those Westerners have no money to buy a proper jeans. They can only wear shorts, stuff like that. But then on the North Korean side, which was ironically very chill. Oh. There were not many rules. They allowed us to take a lot of photos and videos of everything. We were having jokes at the border side, which is looking into South Korea. They didn't really care about how the other side would think of them. But what was interesting for me is that on both sides, they have their own respective way of giving propaganda to the visitors, right? Like, okay, this is how you should see them on the other side, and then on the other side they say the same, like this is how you should see them as well. And in North Korea, they have their own narrative of the Korean War that we, of course, don't agree with, but it's still interesting to hear that coming out of their mouths. And then, yeah, you can, if you did both tours, you can compare both tours. Yeah, it was interesting, definitely interesting.
And Bart, before we move on to the second question, which passport are you holding at the moment for you to have gone to these tours?
A Dutch passport.
I see. All right. Now, T, could you ask the second question, please?
Right. So Travis King crossed to the north, as we've talked about during the tour. But as a person who has been there before, can you believe it? It was that easy for him to cross such a heavily armed border like that?
Do you want my honest opinion?
Yeah, sure.
That is the most debated question.
Yes, well, we all have these intrusive thoughts that, especially I had them on both sides. I was standing there, I was like, what if I make a run for it? What happens? Of course, no person with the right mind would do that. But the thought crossed my mind, because at some point you're away from the border line, maybe 20 meters. And on the South Korean side, there were 3 guards in between me and the border line. And those guards were facing North Korea. So I thought, what if I make a run for it now? Like, will their reflexes be fast enough to stop me? Because once you cross that line, it's over. They cannot cross the line. And I believe in South Korea, they wouldn't shoot at you. But if you do it from north to south, I think they will shoot at you before you cross the line, because the soldiers are facing you, because they want to stop people from defecting to the south. But in South Korea, they're facing North Korea because they want to embrace the people who want to defect to South Korea. But you're so close to the line that it does feel like you can cross it easily.
Yeah. It's definitely not an easy thing, though, because as you mentioned before, you have to sign a paper saying that you won't be doing anything foolish because this is the center of geopolitical tensions there.
Right. It's so, like, it all looks like a kind of like a tourist attraction, like they give you a story that is exciting and then people want to visit this kind of place. But in the end, it's all very much real.
It's reality.
Very much so. And
Yeah,
and as
reality.
you mentioned, I mean, even though we think it is so uncanny and impossible to think of, apparently this isn't the first time that an American soldier has actually defected to North Korea, right? So in your opinion, based on the past precedents and the happenings, how do you think this incident, Travis King's incident, will unfold or progress?
I hope they're going to release him, but I don't think it will happen anytime soon. They can use him as a bargain in whatever negotiations they want to do. We don't know. That's a simple answer. We don't know. It's really hard to communicate with North Korea. They communicate whenever they want to communicate. We know that they're listening, but I believe they haven't really clearly said anything about the situation. So it could take months, maybe years. As we know, North Korea is still in Corona lockdown. So this will have an impact on their decision on whether to release this man, Travis.
Right.
I hope they release him, and when they release him, I hope he will be punished accordingly, because his actions had such strong impact on diplomatic relationships between North Korea, America, North Korea, South Korea, but also all those people involved to work on this situation. Like it costs a lot of money, right?
I know.
Very
You have the UN, neutral countries, South Korea, America, they all have to work on this. It's a big deal.
That's great insight. And Bart, I have one last question for you. As a person who's actually been to North Korea, what would I don't think Travis King really thought what would be there. Could you tell us what's actually there? What we could expect?
I think he's a bit naive. I mean, if I don't know. We don't know if they treat him well or not. But they definitely imprison him, I believe, for now, and see what kind of use he has for North Korea as a negotiation power. But I'm pretty sure the moment he crossed the line, he already regretted his decision.
All right, because as a person who's been to the North, you know best, right?
No, I don't. I mean, as a tourist, you see what they
It's a
show
little
you.
different,
So, yeah, you still see the best side and the most loyal people in North Korea. But I read books. I talked to many defectors here in South Korea. So, but we know that North Korea has many different faces, and most of those faces are not pretty.
All right, thank you so much, Bart. It was a pleasure to talk to you today.
Likewise, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, and I've asked this last question to Bart right now. What would you guys like to see in terms of this incident with Travis King wrap up? How would you like to see it go?
I mean, it was interesting what Bart said, because he mentioned memoirs and documentaries about people who defected to North Korea. One of the soldiers actually wrote a memoir after he returned, quote, "The Reluctant Communist," and it documents his, I think, about 40 years life of living under constant surveillance, like arranged marriage, and having to be used for propaganda for North Korea and teaching English to these North Korean officials. So it seems that his life is not going to pan out whatever he imagined the way it was going to. So I really hope that Travis King does return safely, but understands the consequence as a military person of what he has done,
Right.
because he holds the service, the honor, and the responsibility as a military man. And this is, quite a disheartening news.
It's a very heavy responsibility that should not be taken lightly, for sure. What about you, Chi-hee?
Well, King is believed to be under North Korean custody now, and I really do hope that he can return safely, although as Bart said, and as we kind of know, it won't be anytime soon, unfortunately, but he should be taking responsibility over what he's done.
Right.
But I hope that this doesn't deteriorate the relationship between the North and the US and South Korea
And
as well.
even South Korea.
Yeah.
We'll have to see how events unfold from here. But in the meantime, we'll be here every day from 9:30 to 10 a.m. Korea time, bringing you more topics young people are talking about. Special thanks to Choi Ji-hee
Thank you.
and Cheska Dainong.
Pleasure's always mine. Thank you.
All right, and thank you everyone for watching. We'll see you tomorrow. We are News
Generation.